Welcome, 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 everyone. Welcome back to After Wine School. I'm here. I'm Keith Wallace. This is Alana Zerbe. And we're going to talk today about everyone's favorite time in wine history. Wine history. Wines of the medieval era.
I love this. This is so you.
No, it's everything. It's monks. It's kings. It's just basically Game of Thrones, but with surprisingly less feminism. That is what this is all about.
And these wines really are the precursors for the wines that we drink today. So particular wine styles and ideas about wine, this is where it all comes from.
It does. It's actually quite fascinating. This is going to be a lot of fun. But folks, so what would you rather drink? Just honestly, do you want to drink big, unctuous wines that taste like honey had a bad day, or fermented skins? Yeah.
You're talking grape skins.
Yeah.
Right?
Usually.
Okay.
Usually. Yeah. So we're just going to start off where everyone loves to start off. We're going to start off with the monks. Because whenever you hear about this era, you always hear about monks and about making wine. And the question should be like, why? Why was it monks doing all this? Why is it whenever we hear about the origin of wine, especially in Europe, we always hear about the monks, like the monks in Burgundy? Look, and what they're doing, then it's true. Like, they're spending their days, years, lives, and generations finding perfect places to grow grapes. And, from our eyes, it's like, oh, they're looking for terroirs. That's actually where the concept originates from, like this whole idea that certain grapes grow better in certain places. And that is actually true. But they're not doing it for that reason, right? It's fascinating. What they were doing was they were looking for God. They have this very unique viewpoint. They thought God was in all things. And you could actually find God, find the truth by how the world works around you and how you can actually manipulate it. And their idea was, oh, if I can plant this in this one space, it is different. So this is like the hand of the world, Mother Nature, or in their mind, like God, changing things. They were fascinated by this. And they spent, it wasn't just wines. They did this with peas and everything else too. But with wine, they were meticulous, finding every little place and every little change. Absolutely astounding.
Right. So they had the time.
You're right. Because you think, why could
That's all wonderful.
Yeah, that's wonderful. But how could they do this? You're good. That's a really good point. So one, they had time. They were at a monastery. They're monks. Like, they have all the time. But the truth is that they could putz around quite a bit and look for the little things in nature that they're trying to finding revelation there. But the truth is they also had one job. They have one job they have to produce wine. And that wine, because for mass, back then it wasn't like, oh, you could just swap it out. Oh no. That was the covenant. And this goes back to ancient worlds, even pre-Christian religions believe that if you do not have wine, it was not real. You had to have it. It was an obligation, a moral obligation to have wine in such ceremonies. So they had to. That was their main job. And if they screwed that up, they're going to be in big trouble. You're basically not monks anymore if you're not doing it.
Absolutely. And these were also big landowners. Lots of donations came from the nobility to the church. And so they had time, they had purpose, and they had the land.
Absolutely. And I want to point out one more thing. Because they were the only literate people, largely outside of the nobility, they could record everything. And so it was this thing where they would record everything they did, and then the other monks would come in and then read their writes and add to it. So you have generation upon generation of written work identifying what they were doing with their vineyards. And it was invaluable. And as well as that really first time we see this happening, where we have concrete evidence of people making wine very specifically and focused on specific plots of land with specific grapes.
And that's also why we know as much as we do about the monks from this era is they were writing
Absolutely.
history.
Yes.
And so it's something that we could look back on. Now, when you were talking earlier about the way that the monks saw God's hand in everything, in every expression in nature, in every work that they did, it really made me think in a new way about the idea of terroir, and specifically in France, how they don't even have an equivalent word for winemaker.
That's true.
It's always about bringing the wine from the land, raising it up, elevating it. And I never saw the connection until you started talking about this to that as a spiritual practice, because the French are not religious today.
I know, isn't it crazy? Like, they're the most atheist of all, like, and yet everything they think about wine is all based in like really old religious belief systems.
That's so fascinating to me. I really will take that with me and think and talk about terroir a little bit differently.
Because, one of the things I always say is terroir is bullshit. Like, I always say that. But there is this emotional center to it. Because this is actually that moment. It's a fascinating moment where religion, and one idea of religion, that God is in everything, starts to dovetail into science. Because you can really see where the idea that if God is in everything, then you start looking for proofs and examples. This does segue into like the scientific method. Like, this is where we start seeing that movement from the Renaissance into the Enlightenment. It really starts here with wine.
That's fascinating. Yeah. I love that. So a second component, another way to frame wine, a very important way to frame wine, is wine as medicine.
Oh, yeah. Okay, because this is something else that just dates back all the way. I mean, we have ancient scholars like Galen, like Jewish scholars. We have Hippocrates, even Discordes. We have these texts, and we can see that wine was used as medicine from the earliest era. And in fact, we have something called Hippocrates. And Hippocrates, that would be a great name. I actually want to start a brand called Hippocrates. This is actually the origin. It's wine accented with herbs and spices, specific blends, designed to heal specific maladies. And then by the time we get to the Middle Ages, we're really starting to see things like chartreuse being created out of this ancient, and there's a lot of these ancient tonics that were all wine-based with a lot of herbs and spices. Yeah, absolutely fantastic.
And of course, as this is true in relatively recent history as well, water was not safe.
When I teach wine history, I actually point out that one of probably the reason why wine became so endemic within societies from the earliest versions of societies, we're talking, throwback to the Canaanites, guys, hey, you did good. Child sacrifice, but wine, yes. But you had wine as a core part of life, not as religion and life in general. Like, if you drank wine, you did not die nearly as young as everyone else did. And there was a specific acid, and there still is, right? So I know it's the tartaric acid, not as much the alcohol, but the tartaric acid in wine grapes, that actually brought about this revelation of being healthy and being good for you, because it kills 99% of all foodborne bacteria, meaning that, no matter how spoiled your meat was that you ate, or how contaminated your water supply was, that if you mixed wine in it, you were good. It would kill any E. coli in your water. Like, think about that for a second. Just, gross.
Well, this is why there were public fountains that had wine and not water. It wasn't just party time.
This is why it was a health benefit. It was important for the health of a city or a small community to have wine. And then, of course, it's that antibacterial elements, that antifungal elements of the tartaric acid, but also alcohol, of course, also kills foodborne bacteria or any kinds, right? It disinfects. So this was a remarkable innovation. And adding spices and herbs to it, there's a lot of effect there, because there's a lot of science that shows the compounds that you can extract with alcohol out of herbs are actually incredibly beneficial to you. And we know this to this day. Like, how many people take supplements that include things like cinnamon or,
turmeric.
Turmeric. Oh, turmeric's a big one these days. Yes. So yeah, this is old knowledge. This is ancient knowledge that we're kind of coming back to today.
So we've covered religion.
Yes.
We've covered medicine.
Yes.
Let's cover the political.
Oh.
So
okay. All right.
So Bordeaux, starting in 1152, through the marriage of Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor married one of the Plantagenet kings, Henry Plantagenet, Henry II. And suddenly England became the ruler of Bordeaux.
Yeah. And Bordeaux, and so let's not think about Bordeaux as it is today, right? Because they grew red and white grapes, and they did like the ancient Greeks did. They co-fermented them. Now, this wine, claret, was pinkish, reddish, also a little sweet. So, like, this was closer to Sutterholm White Zin than the Bordeaux we think of today.
Right. This predates the draining of the swamps. So, further inland, there were much better wines.
Oh, yeah.
And their wines were dark and rich and tannic. They had Malbec. They had Tannat. So they had these really decadent wines that were preferred at that time. They were seen as more powerful. But,
oh yes, there's the big but.
This is where politics comes into play.
Yeah.
These wines were quintessentially French. And to stifle the quintessentially French wines, you had actors like the wine police who were preventing the French wines that were not from Bordeaux. They were preventing them from going to market, being exported to the wider world, which had been fans of them before this time. So what happened was a very intentional promotion of the wines of Bordeaux over other areas where wines were richer and darker.
Absolutely. I love that story. I love this story. Because what they were doing, what they did was they're like, oh yeah, we'll eventually get to your wines. Yeah, you can bring them in. We'll eventually let them ship out from the port. But yeah, controlling the port means you controlled destiny. And they squeezed out the French. The English just choked them out. And to this day, I mean, how many people actually know, Cahors? Or even the fact that they grow Malbec. Like, that was the place where Malbec, is the most famous. Like, you can buy a great Cahors for $15. Mm-hmm. Whereas, a similar quality from Bordeaux is going to cost you $30, $40. So it's like, they're just unknown. And that's thanks to the medieval era that raised up Bordeaux. But why was Bordeaux doing this? Why were they insisting on controlling this market? Well, they were running out of wine. In the UK, they were now dealing with climate change, right? In the way that they were actually having a climate was cooling, and they no longer could grow wine. They needed wine. And of course, right, they're a Christian country. You need wine. But also they love wine, and so they need a ready, accessible vendor, producer of wine that they can get, that they can own. And of course, they want to choke out their competition. They also want to make some money on this. So wine was always a part of religion. It was always a part of politics and everything else, but it was really about status too. And so now, in the medieval era, calories were not easy to come by, right? And one of the biggest status symbols was actually having a very sweet honeyed wine. And the nobility got very sweet wines. Now, these are wines that even today, even what you would consider dessert wines, these were considered table wines. They were incredibly unctuous. And they're being sourced from places like where we get like sherries today, like, the south of Spain, but also in Cyprus, Commandaria, which still is made today, and you can try it. It's really intense. That was considered, your table wine.
Yes, and then the opposite end, the other end of the scale, would be your piquette, which is what peasants drank. So Keith was mentioning earlier in the podcast this re-fermented skins.
Yes.
What he's referring to is a style of wine from your spent skins from a prior fermentation.
Yes.
Gathering those together, pushing water through them, and extracting the last little bit of flavor and a little bit of alcohol. And these were super funky, fizzy, but would be recognizable to someone today who was, into natural wine. You could see the nascent beginning of that style. And piquette is being made again in places like Chile.
Oh, yeah. And it's funny because if you just took someone from Manhattan and they dropped them into the medieval ages, what you would end up like asking, like, which wine would you prefer? They most likely would prefer the peasant wine because those sweet, unctuous wines, they just don't fit with our idea of what good wine is now. But Piquet, oh, yeah, weird, funky, 2% alcohol, and just like so much volatile acidity that it's like you're drinking vinegar. That is crazy. But the thing is, and we know because we have written history about this, is that both sides of this equation thought they were drinking the better wines.
But then as things evolved, we had the nobility who continued to drink these dessert wines. We had the peasants who had Piquet. And then we had the rise of the merchant class.
Yes.
And they were able to drink your local red or white wines. So your wines that were made from actual grapes, but that were dry. And so that's where I would choose to be.
I know. Isn't it interesting that this is where modern wine culture comes?
Yes.
It doesn't come from the elite. It doesn't come from the peasants. It comes from the middle classes. As the middle class forms, we start seeing wine recognizable as it is today. And then the outliers are actually the Piquets and what now are dessert wines, but then were just everyday wines. However, now, but of course with this, these classes, we also now are seeing enforcements of the places we all are drinking. Where is it that people are actually congregating and having alcohol? It's taverns. So when people are traveling, you're going to a tavern. And you may be a peasant, you may be merchant, or you may be wealthy, but you're all there. Like get in the same places. And so you do start seeing enforcement of the wines being served, making sure they're not watered down, making sure, everything is, quote unquote, up to code. I don't know what up to code would be. Basically, you're not like skinning animals on the bar. But this is where we're starting to see taxation. Because everything, sure, it's about enforcement, but it's also now about taxation. And you're seeing these things as we recognize it today as the ideas of culture, but now they're enforced. But also now you're starting to see that taxation coming into public spaces and specifically where alcohol is being consumed and bought.
And it's so interesting because these taverns were seen as part of the women's world, the domestic sphere.
Yes.
Because they also housed people overnight. So
yeah.
They weren't just a bar, they were more like a hotel.
Yeah. I mean, this again is incredibly fascinating. What you're really seeing is, because you think about you're in the medieval era, the only place where food and wine is in a house. So, who's running the house? The matriarch, a woman's running the house. Well, what happens when you actually bring people in who are traveling through? Well, it's still a house. And eventually the whole idea, because people are living there, but now it's not your family, it's other people coming in, but it's still a house. So it always remained as a place where that woman ran. But it became this point of independence that a woman could actually be in business and running a hotel, restaurant. And this is the first time you start seeing, women in public economic spaces coming toe to toe with like the law in this scenario. It's absolutely fascinating that how this all evolved from a household into a hotel, into a bar. But yeah, and here we are on the intermediary stage. And of course, this is also where women are being charged with witchcraft. And that does come to that point where, yeah, what if you are serving that wine with like wormwood in it? What if, you're conjuring spells, you're fermenting things, and that goes back a long way. You even have a history of housewives or women in like ancient Germany. Like they thought they were witches because they were fermenting things. These ideas did have significant effect over our cultural world here in the New World, and not just Europe. Yeah. And this is the beginning. You can pull these threads and keep pulling these threads and find more of today in the medieval era. It all kind of starts here. And it's interesting that when restaurants and wine became more male dominated and then slowly started becoming more female dominated again, or now it's really a lovely thing. I love this episode. I love talking about this. Wine was everywhere. It was tied to class. It was tied to religion. Even had implications in your drug use. Everything was here. But this is a great place to leave off for today, I think. All I gotta say is, folks, hey, thank you. If you enjoyed this, I recommend becoming a somm, going through the National Wine Schools programs. Right, our benefactors at wineschool.us, highly recommend them. They allow me to investigate these things and actually create entire programs on things like ancient wine. So yeah, and I'm really glad they let me do that.
That's an amazing program, Keith. Yeah,
Thank you.
People absolutely love that.
Yeah, they do.
And if you're in the Philadelphia area, you can come to an ancient wine class or program. You will see myself or Keith teaching full-time at the Wine School of Philadelphia. Check us out if you want to. And thank you so much, everyone. This has been a delight.
Okay, so I think next we're going to keep on the theme of history.
Yes.
We're going to jump into the Renaissance.
Thank you so much, everyone. We really appreciate it. Cheers.
Bye, folks.